Good morning. It is a lovely sunny day here at Magali's farm. Sun is shining. It's nice and warm for a winter's day. And we are out here at the compost heap. Um, Here at Magali's farm we have quite a few compost heaps. So I'm here at one of them. We use various compost heaps for various functions. This specific one is just an old water tank that was cut in half at some stage. It's got a huge crack on the side, so it can't hold water anymore. I'm actually using the other half of this as my fish pond by my front door, so it was utilized fairly well. We seem to have a lot of questions of what you can put in compost. Now, I've actually been doing a lot of research on this for quite an extensive period of time, and it's still interesting to see how much confusion there is about a process that is millennia old. I mean, nature has been doing this forever, and it seems to be doing quite well. So very quickly, in a nutshell, what you can put in your compost heap depends on three major things: the size of your compost heap, the kind of composting you do, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic, those kind of things, whether it's hot composting or cold composting, and then the amount of moisture that you can add into your compost heap. So let's start off with size. The smaller, generally speaking, the smaller your compost, the least favorable it is to put in animal products like meat or bones or dairy, simply because it generates a lot of smell. It takes a fair vigorous amount of decomposing to actually break that stuff down, and generally speaking it attracts mice and rats and all sorts of elements that you don't want in a small garden, in a small household garden, in a small estate, for example, even in an apartment where you do your own composting. That contributes a lot to it. Also, you need to kind of have a very high temperature to break down some of the stuff like dairy or so. So if your compost heap is too small and it cannot actually generate that core heat that you need, I would generally avoid it. In our case, well, my compost heap is fairly big, so we add in everything we can. It also gets so hot that generally speaking you can't put your hand in the middle of that compost heap at any given time. It will burn your hand, like in severe burns. So it does get up quite high. As a matter of fact, a lot of people know that compost heaps have the potential to catch fire, and it often does. Second thing that I would like to say is, on our compost heap, we do a no-turn compost system, simply because we don't have the manpower or the capacity at the moment to turn the compost heap. So, which means that this will be left for about 5, 6, 7, 8 months, 10 months, depending on when I need to utilize it or when it's ready. And I just let the layers organically decompose all by itself. I don't add in extra water. There's another reason why I don't add water in. Rainwater, I tend to feel, gives you enough moisture in the compost, generally speaking, or yeah, where we are anyway. Another reason is our sawdust, which we use for the chickens, which is mixed with chicken manure, actually tends to dry out all the unsavory stuff like the dog's scat and chicken manure and pig manure and meat and all those kind of rotting things. It tends to absorb all that moisture out of that, and that drying up process slows down the decomposing, which means that generally speaking our compost heaps don't smell tremendously, even though it's got all this organic matter in it, it doesn't smell as bad because it's a slow process. However, it will take up to a year for this to, whereas if you have a turn system, like in some of the nice compost turning drums and stuff like that, where you have a daily turn or a weekly turn, and you have a much more general spread of decomposing throughout the whole system, then you can add a lot of stuff in there and it will, generally speaking, decompose much faster. I mean, sometimes you can have compost within 2-3 months if you're lucky, also depending on the temperature and moisture. Another aspect that people always wonder about is moisture. Generally speaking, this is just a general rule of thumb. It varies from specific to specific. Like, for example, if you have worms in your compost, it does tend to be, it needs to be a very specific moisture content so that the worms can move around through the compost heap without drowning, but also without drying out their skin because of the mucus layer they use to go through the soil. So that's important. But general rule of thumb, if it's dry, wet it. If it's wet, dry it. That's really a general rule of thumb. In our compost heap, you can see the top layer is fairly dry. This is a fairly dry compost, and that, like I say, will take forever to decompose. It might even take years if it's left as is. But the moment you go a little bit deeper in the compost heap, you can see this is nice and moist. There's a lot of moisture in there, from the chicken manure, from the rain we had, and also then from the organics that I put in. And I can show you here, this is all our chicken scraps. There's some rotting beans, some tea bags, chicken carcasses, chicken bones, a few of the odd scrapings and stuff that I don't give to our chickens. And you can see all the nice juice dripping out of that, and that, generally speaking, will give you enough moisture to actually help with the decomposing process. And then you basically just cover it up, and that's a nice thing about the compost. Generally speaking, if it's smelly, just cover it with a nice dry layer of leaves or grass clippings or anything like that that will cover that, and that will, generally speaking, reduce the stench of a compost heap, especially one like ours. I might say that the only thing I will never put on my compost heap, purely because of the sustainability of it and the problems that it causes, is something like, say, for example, a potato that's got potato blight. That is something that will never go on my compost heap unless I know it will be in the middle of the compost heap where it gets to very high temperatures that will kill off those pathogens. But that it's always a risk, and something like potato blight can stain your soil for years and years and years, and will make problems with all your solanum species like tomatoes, eggplants. You can pretty much never grow potatoes again, or it feels like it, unless you use chemicals and all the rest, and sterilize your soil. But from a garden perspective, try and avoid putting in something like potato blight into your compost heap, especially because 99% of the time your compost is going to end up in your garden, especially the veggie garden. So you don't want to introduce, I even avoid putting sick tomato plants that's got a lot of rust on them, or any of the fungal diseases and stuff. I tend to avoid it, generally speaking. There's a specific compost heap that those kind of things goes onto, and that gets utilized like way out in the field over there, where there's no risk of that ever contaminating my vegetable soil. Especially if you do raised gardens where you have a confined growing space for the things, I'd be very careful to use any diseased material in your compost heap. Like I say, unless you are lucky enough where your compost goes extremely hot, that usually gets rid of the diseases, but it's not a 100% guarantee. So in a nutshell, that's basically what we do. I'm just going to cover up that pile now and going to head out the rest of the day. Going to spend some time with the guardian dogs down by the chickens, training the young pups again a little bit. And for the rest, yeah, time to start with some yard cleaning.